On December 22nd, 2018, as most of the country was gearing up for Christmas, the United States government began to shut down. The budget for fiscal year 2019 needed to be passed, but the second of two continuing resolutions had expired. The government missed its deadline. Over 400,000 federal employees were told to not come into work, and millions of essential personnel were told to continue coming into work, but to do so without pay. As the country was turning on their Christmas lights, the national Christmas tree was turned off. And although it was eventually relit thanks to donations from the private sector, the same couldn't be said for the numerous government agencies shuttered and the services suspended as the nation waited for a deal to be struck. The main cause behind the current shutdown is President Trump's desire for a border wall. President Trump wants $5 billion in additional funding for a wall on the Mexican border, and Congressional Democrats, buoyed by their performance in the midterm elections, aren't particularly inclined to give it to him. The result is the third government shutdown in the span of a year, a first in modern U.S. history. And this isn't, just speculation. The government shutdown and its causes are things that the president has explicitly owned.
You know what? I could have debated Chuck Schumer for a long period of time because he was saying, it's yours, it's your idea. And then finally I said, look, I don't mind. I don't mind having the issue of border security on my side. If we have to close down the country over border security, I actually like that in terms of an issue, but I don't want it to be an issue.
As of writing and recording, the government shutdown is still ongoing. In fact, it's about to enter its third week. President Trump has said that while he hopes it won't come to it, he's prepared to shut the government down for months or even years. Although it's doubtful that it'll get quite that long, the negotiations aren't so effective that we can say that there's an end in sight either. On first glance, the explanations for why the government shuts down appears pretty straightforward. Shutdowns happen when there's a lapse in the government's ability to fund its operations. There's a certain percentage of the government's budget that's allotted out by law, leaving, the rest as discretionary. If the government doesn't exert its discretion, then a bunch of stuff doesn't receive any money. The government can't afford to keep itself working, so, like a business unable to pay its bills, it ceases operations. But it's actually more complicated than that. There have been dozens of times over the nation's history when there was some lapse in the budget or another. Shoot, there's been 22 since 1976, but there's only been 10 shutdowns in the same span of time. In order to understand why government shutdowns happen, we have to go back to the very first government shutdown. Way back. All the way back to 1980? Wait, that can't be right. Let's see here. The U.S. federal government shutdown in 1980 was the first federal government shutdown in the United States. Huh. Well, I'll be damned. And it's not like Wikipedia could ever be wrong or fabricated, so clearly we should just believe this, without a second thought. Fortunately, it's not just Wikipedia. Fox, HuffPo, Washington Post, the AP, Business Insider, and a bunch of other outlets all report that the first ever government shutdown happened in 1980. So unless there's just this massive conspiracy that's agreed to by every news organization across the political spectrum...
Oh, wait, you serious? Let me laugh even harder.
I think it's safe to say that that's when it really happened. But a number of the dozens of funding lapses that I mentioned previously happened prior to the 1980s, so why didn't they cause government shutdowns? The reason can be traced back to everyone's favorite 1.5-term US president and 2-term president of Earth, Richard Nixon. Boy, there's a lot of Futurama references in this video. I blame it on my annual New Year's Futurama binge.
Here's to another lousy millennium.
Back in the 1970s, President Richard Nixon was aggressively pushing the boundaries of the president's executive prerogative through the use of impoundment. Impoundment is when Congress allocates money for a particular purpose, but the president downright refuses to actually spend it. Now, impoundment is something that presidents did all the way going back to Thomas Jefferson, but Nixon was uniquely audacious, going as far as to impound monies that Congress had allocated after overriding his veto. Additionally, Nixon could get pretty creative when it came to circumventing Congress and funneling money towards things that he felt was important. In response, Congress passed the 1974 Congressional Budget and Impoundment Control Act, which all but eliminated the president's impoundment powers and changed the way that the budget process works. But this also included the introduction of the fiscal year and the budget timeline. Before, lapses were generally understood to be things that happened, things that Congress would get to when they happened. Now the resolution had to happen, and when it had to happen was given the imprimatur of law. This change in the budget process prompted President Jimmy Carter to ask his Attorney General Benjamin Civiletti what legally needed to happen when these occasions cropped up. In his opinion to President Carter, he wrote, "The Comptroller General concluded that under the so-called Anti-Deficiency Act, any supervisory officer or employee who directs or permits agency employees to work during any period for which Congress has not enacted an appropriation for the pay of those employees violates the Anti-Deficiency Act." Notwithstanding that conclusion, the Comptroller General also took the position that Congress did not intend federal agencies to be closed during periods of lapped appropriations. In my view, these conclusions are inconsistent. It is my opinion that during periods of lapsed appropriations, no funds may be expended except as necessary to bring about the orderly termination of an agency's function. The Anti-Deficiency Act, which he's referring to, was originally passed in 1870, which prohibited executive agencies from spending money that they didn't actually have. This came about because the agencies had a habit of pursuing their own goals by taking out credit when Congress wouldn't okay the money or even the goals themselves. So Congress, not wanting to embarrass the nation, decided to pay off its financial obligations, but they eventually grew tired of covering the executive's butt. So they said enough was enough and passed a law that stated that the executive could not knowingly overextend themselves financially. Civiletti's opinion acknowledged the numerous budgetary lapses prior to the 1980s, but suggested that all the parties involved were acting in ways that were incommensurate with the law and not ceasing government functions. About a week after this decision, we had the first ever government shutdown. The Federal Trade Commission was shut down since Congress failed to pass a bill allotting money for its operations. 1,600 workers were furloughed, and the shutdown is estimated to have cost $700,000. Yeah, you heard me correctly. Shutting down the government actually cost the government money. In fact, every single one has, albeit to different degrees, depending on the duration and when. Although some may look at government shutdowns as a quick and swift way to cut spending, all it does is postpone actions that were already supposed to happen. It's not restructuring the government so that its imprint is smaller, it's just paralyzing it so that it can't get anything done. This includes things as small as preventing the FCC Commissioner Ajit Pai from attending the Consumer Electronics Show, to things as consequential as shutting down the E-Verify system, which is instrumental in hiring people in numerous sectors of the economy. That's not even considering the indirect costs, such as market volatility and the effects trickling out from millions of people unable to buy stuff or pay bills in a timely manner. Even if the economic impact is small as a percentage of GDP because the duration was small or for some other reason, it's always larger than if the government was just allowed to keep running as business as usual. About a year later, Civiletti issued another opinion, which largely guides today's practice. In it, he specified that only non-essential personnel would be forced to stop working. Essential personnel would need to consider doing their jobs, they just won't get paid. As could be anticipated, the definition of what is considered to be essential has expanded quite considerably since then, which is why if you were traveling for the holidays, you still saw TSA workers in airports. What about those funding lapses that happened after 1980 but didn't result in a government shutdown? Well, most of them happened to be at propitious times, such as, over the weekend, or resolved so quickly that it didn't actually interfere with the normal operation of government. Since there was a first government shutdown that came after all these different lapses in the funding of government, it strongly suggests that they don't actually have to happen. Kind of like the budget ceiling, these are entirely contrived controversies. Indeed, there were reports in the 1980s that suggested ways to amend the Anti-Deficiency Act to maintain government order during a funding lapse. But none of those things have been implemented. And if I can inject my own political cynicism here, I think that the main reason is that there's actually a perverse incentive to keep it. Both parties have used the possibility of government shutdowns as a bargaining chip, trying to use the resulting unpopularity to invade their opponents into making concessions. That's why there's so much effort expended to make it seem like the gridlock is, quote, the other team's fault. Why surrender such a powerful negotiating tool when the actual economic damage is so minimal? In any event, the history of government shutdowns demonstrate just how much structural changes can ripple out in American politics, and how its unintended consequences can shape future political outcomes. I figured that a video on budget shutdowns would be as good a time as any to mention that the channel now has a Patreon. Making these videos takes a considerable amount of time and effort, and as I've joked about before, right, being a PhD student, you don't exactly make a killing. Additionally, there are things that I'd like to do with the channel in the future. Things like feature experts on some video topics, gather unique data, or go to events like VidCon and ThinkerCon where I can meet some other awesome creators to do more collabs with, and meet some of you incredible people out there. Patrons get things like bonus commentary, their names featured at the end of the videos, and something like a la Rio Mio, a shout out for their birthday. Also, a birthday card from the wife and I, if that sounds like something you'd be interested in. It's just an idea that I'm kind of floating out there, I don't know. So, still trying to figure it out. It's my intent to make these videos freely available for as as long as I possibly can. So if you enjoyed the kinds of videos that I make and you can afford to help, and I want to emphasize that last bit because, again, I can definitely sympathize with that. I hope that you consider helping out. Every little bit helps. That'll do it for this week's video. I'm curious to see what your guys' thoughts are about, the current government shutdown and the history of government shutdowns in general, down in the comment section below. Sources for everything is always down in the doobie-doo, as well as links to Facebook, Twitter, and the blog. Of course, you can get that there as well. If you enjoyed this video, hope you consider giving it a thumbs up. If you want to support the channel, you can do so by commenting down below, by sharing this video, and by subscribing to the channel to stay in the loop for more awesome social science content is uploaded. If you want to be guaranteed to be in the loop when I upload a new video, be sure to click the bell icon as well. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you next time.